The world is a place of staggering economic diversity. Some nations boast incredible wealth, with citizens enjoying high standards of living. Conversely, many countries struggle with widespread poverty, where basic necessities are scarce. This economic disparity, both between and within nations, is a defining feature of our global landscape. Understanding global economic inequality is crucial in today's interconnected world. It impacts everything from international relations and migration patterns to global health and environmental sustainability. By examining the historical roots of inequality and its modern manifestations, we can begin to grapple with this complex issue. This essay delves into the concept of global economic inequality, exploring its historical evolution over the past century. We'll examine how income differences between and within countries have changed, highlighting the increasing disparities that characterize our world today. To understand the present state of global inequality, it's helpful to look back in time. By examining the economic history of the past 1,000 years, we can gain insights into how the world has evolved to its current state. 1,000 years ago, the world was a far more economically equal place. Societies were primarily agrarian, and wealth was distributed more evenly across different regions. The majority of people lived off the land, and the concept of vast economic disparity was not as pronounced as it is today. Differences in income between regions were relatively small. Most communities were self-sufficient, producing what they needed locally. Trade did exist, but it was limited and often involved luxury goods rather than everyday necessities. While empires rose and fell and trade routes connected distant lands, the overall standard of living varied less dramatically than it does today. The Silk Road, for example, facilitated the exchange of goods and ideas between East and West, but it did not create significant economic divides. Of course, this doesn't mean everyone lived in prosperity a millennium ago. Life was hard for many, with peasants toiling in the fields and facing numerous hardships. Famine, disease, and war were common, and survival was a daily struggle for the majority. Poverty and hardship were widespread. The average person had a life expectancy of just 40 years, and infant mortality rates were high. Despite these challenges, the gap between the richest and poorest regions was narrower than it is today. However, the chasm between the richest and poorest regions was narrower. Wealth was often concentrated in the hands of a few, such as kings and nobles, but the overall economic landscape was more balanced. The disparity we see today, with some countries being vastly richer than others, was not as evident. The concept of developed and developing countries, so central to our understanding of the world today, did not exist in the same way. Societies were more isolated, and technological advancements spread slowly. This relative equality began to shift around the 18th century with the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. The introduction of new technologies such as the steam engine revolutionized production and led to unprecedented economic growth in certain regions. European nations, particularly Great Britain, experienced unprecedented economic growth, driven by technological advancements and new forms of production. Factories sprang up, cities expanded, and a new era of industrialization began, setting the stage for the modern economic landscape. This marked the beginning of a divergence in economic fortunes, creating a widening gap between the West and the rest. As industrialized nations grew wealthier, other regions lagged behind, leading to the global inequality we see today. Understanding this history is crucial for addressing the economic challenges of our time. The Industrial Revolution marked a turning point in global economic history. It was a period of profound transformation, where manual labor and traditional industries began to be replaced by machinery and mass production. This era saw the rise of factories, steam engines, and new manufacturing processes that revolutionized the way goods were produced and consumed. As some nations embraced industrialization, others were left behind. The rapid advancements in technology and infrastructure in industrialized nations created a stark contrast with regions that continued to rely on traditional farming and manual labor. This disparity set the stage for significant economic and social differences that would only grow over time. This led to the Great Divergence, a period of rapidly expanding income differences between regions. The economic gap between industrialized and non-industrialized nations widened dramatically as the former experienced unprecedented growth and prosperity, while the latter struggled to keep up. Countries that industrialized early gained a significant economic advantage, while those that remained reliant on agriculture and traditional industries struggled to keep pace. The benefits of industrialization were immense, including increased productivity, higher wages, and improved standards of living. However, these benefits were not evenly distributed across the globe. Figure 1.2, which we'll discuss in a later section, visually illustrates this divergence. It provides a clear representation of how the economic trajectories of different regions have diverged over time, highlighting the growing income disparities. It shows how income gaps between the richest and poorest regions have widened dramatically over the past 2 centuries. The data reveals a persistent and growing divide, with wealth increasingly concentrated in a few regions while many others lag behind. The Industrial Revolution, colonialism, and unequal access to technology and resources all contributed to this growing disparity. Colonial powers exploited their colonies for resources and labor, further entrenching economic inequalities. Technological advancements were often concentrated in industrialized nations, leaving others at a significant disadvantage. This divergence has had lasting consequences, shaping the geopolitical landscape and influencing global power dynamics. The economic dominance of industrialized nations allowed them to exert significant influence over global trade, politics, and culture, often at the expense of less developed regions. It's at the heart of many contemporary challenges, including poverty, migration, and conflict. The legacy of economic disparity continues to impact global stability as regions with fewer resources and opportunities face ongoing struggles. Understanding the historical roots of this divergence is essential for addressing these issues. By examining the past, we can better understand the present and work towards a more equitable future where the benefits of progress are shared more widely across all nations. Section 4. Extremes of wealth and poverty: Singapore and Liberia. To illustrate the extremes of global income inequality, let's compare 2 countries, Singapore and Liberia. These 2 nations, though vastly different in many aspects, provide a clear picture of the economic divide that exists in our world. Singapore, a small island nation in Southeast Asia, boasts one of the highest per capita incomes globally. Its strategic location and business-friendly policies have turned it into a major financial hub. Its citizens enjoy a high standard of living, with access to quality education, healthcare, and infrastructure. The government invests heavily in technology and innovation, ensuring that the country remains at the forefront of global development. On the other hand, Liberia, a West African nation, ranks among the poorest countries worldwide. Decades of civil war and political instability have severely hampered its development. Its citizens face numerous challenges, including poverty, lack of access to basic services, and political instability. Many Liberians struggle daily to meet their basic needs, such as clean water, healthcare, and education. The stark contrast between these 2 nations highlights the vast economic disparities that exist in the world today. While Singapore thrives with its modern amenities and prosperous economy, Liberia grapples with the remnants of its troubled past. While these 2 countries represent extreme cases, they underscore the uneven distribution of wealth and opportunity across the globe. The gap between the rich and the poor continues to widen, affecting millions of lives. Factors like geography, historical circumstances, governance, and access to resources all contribute to these disparities. Understanding these factors is crucial in addressing global inequality and working towards a more equitable world. Section 5. Shifting Sands: Global Income Distribution from 1980 to 2014. The latter half of the 20th century witnessed significant shifts in global income distribution. While the gap between the richest and poorest countries remained significant, a new trend emerged: rising incomes in some developing countries, particularly in East Asia. From 1980 to 2014, countries like China, India, and other rapidly industrializing nations experienced remarkable economic growth. Millions were lifted out of poverty as these countries became major players in the global economy. This period challenged the traditional narrative of a static global income hierarchy. However, this positive trend should not overshadow the persistent challenges of global inequality. Despite the economic rise of some developing nations, many others continue to lag behind, trapped in cycles of poverty and underdevelopment. Section 6. A house-divided inequality within nations. While the gap between rich and poor nations remains a pressing issue, it's crucial to acknowledge the rising inequality within individual countries. In recent decades, many nations, including developed and developing ones, have experienced a widening gap between the rich and the poor. This trend is driven by various factors, including globalization, technological advancements, declining labor union power, and policy choices that favor the wealthy. This rising income inequality has profound social and political consequences, leading to social unrest, political polarization, and erosion of trust in institutions. Addressing inequality within nations is as crucial as tackling global disparities. It requires a multifaceted approach, encompassing progressive taxation, social safety nets, investments in education and healthcare, and policies that promote inclusive economic growth.